Pleasure to welcome for the first time Jason Barrett, president of Barrett Sports Media. You can follow Jason on Twitter at Sports Radio PD, Sports Radio PD. He joins us on the Goldberg New and Abraham Law Firm Hotline. Jason, thanks so much for joining us, and particularly at this hour. And we ask with all sincerity, how are you and your family doing during these times?
Hey, it's great to be with you guys, and I appreciate you asking. Right now, fortunately, I live about an hour north of New York City, so I'm not in the heart of this thing. But even just to give some perspective, where I live, if you went back 2.5 weeks ago, when this thing really started to ramp up, we had 3 cases. We're now over 2,100. So it's obviously it limits what you're going to be able to do. We don't go out much. There's a lot of working from home and staying in, but I look at what's happening in New York City, where there are over 100,000, that are infected. You've had, I think the other day I read, 799 people died in one day. So fortunately, we could be in much worse shape. Those folks down there certainly have it harder than we do.
There is no doubt, and it is, city by city and area by area, very, very different. Jason, yesterday we asked a very simple question. Are you going to go back to stadiums when this is done? And we had 3 answers. We had, I'm running back, which is where I am. I'll be the first in line for a minor league baseball game when they start. Get me to a game. But 60% of our audience said they were wait, and then there was a percentage that said they're done going. When you look at whenever we open, because no one knows, and we can't even speculate, but whenever we open, how much do you think attendance will be affected?
I think it'll be affected in the early months. I think, look, a lot of these things, the immediate reaction is to just, prepare and proceed with a little bit of uncertainty and be timid because you don't know what to expect. I mean, look, I don't think we're going to look at a football game with 1,000 people in the stadium. I think, if football was reopening, for example, I still think you're going to see half of a stadium, and then it'll ramp up after that. I have a hard time believing that you're going to have a future of sports without crowds. Now, maybe they'll try that for the first month. I don't know if you guys follow pro wrestling at all, but just as an example, they've been running shows without an audience. And I got to tell you, a lot of people say, you enjoy sports no matter what because it's really for television. When you watch an event take place and there's no crowd, your enthusiasm for what you're watching becomes a lot less. I mean, my son's really into it, and I've tried to watch, and I just go, this doesn't seem fun. Nobody's having a good time. There's no reactions. If somebody hits a 550-foot home run and nobody reacts, does it feel as important? So I think at some point, for sure, I kind of lean where you do. I think, it comes down to people in life and how you see the world. Like, you're either afraid of everything that's going to happen and you go, maybe I'll just stay in my house forever so I never catch anything. Or you go, look, I'm going to live my life and try to be as safe as I can, but I can't stop living. And so that's kind of where I lean.
Well, from the WrestleMania experience and the couple of UFC cards that did take place, if one of the sports leagues called you up, you do a lot of consulting for sports radio, but if you got the ear of a commissioner and they said, listen, we're debating starting without fans, or we could wait a little while longer and we could start with fans. Do you think that these leagues and these sports risk actually damaging their product if they start without fans? We wondered, would college football in particular, without fans, I mean, they could come off looking like an AAF game, if you know what I mean. And do you want to do that if you're college football?
I'll tell you, there's one reason they absolutely do: TV money. There is, at the end of the day, you can pack stadiums all day, and if those networks aren't lining up with big paychecks, you're not going to care whether you have 1,000 people there or 100,000. If those networks, which are spending ridiculous amounts of money for your programming, tell you we want you back on the field without fans, they'll be playing games without fans, and they'll worry about whether or not they look like an AAF product or, what they're capable of pulling off. I think that's really what's going to drive a lot of this. the NBA, you've heard the talk about playing in, one spot in Vegas, baseball talking about playing in Arizona. All of it's driven by we need to get things back on TV, because that's when you look at the advertising business and the crash that it's experiencing right now, everybody is going, especially if you're a sports network, television channel, radio network, all of these things are driven by, well, if sports aren't happening, we're going to pull our advertising dollars and go to the side for a little bit till it comes back. Well, the way you fix that, sports comes back, and now advertisers start coming back, and it feels normal again. So I know that's what's going to drive a lot of this, but I understand the concern about the product and how it looks, because, as I mentioned with the wrestling example, if something doesn't feel as cool, I may not watch it a long time. But I think at this point we're all starving for content. So if they could put something out that maybe is 50% of what we're used to, it's certainly better than zero.
No doubt. I mean, I've become a big fan of the TVG network here in the last month, Jason, because at least I can bet on a horse race. I lost $20 the first day, and I was giddy about it because I was just betting on something. But speaking of gambling, Jason, we've been sitting here in Florida, and like you, we pay great attention to what's going on with the gambling world, and always have. It's been the crux of David and I's show for 12 years. And now that we're close to having legal gambling, we know the ramifications for sports stations, sports television stations, but they were just starting to get going, and they have been put to an abrupt halt. How is this going to affect the sports gambling world in so much money being put in these businesses where it has come to a screeching halt? Oh, yeah, right before the NCAA tournament, Jason.
Oh, listen, I think that's a big deal, and I'll tell you why. First of all, unemployment is surging at 10%, which means even if this thing were to be, declared over tomorrow and the economy starts to return to normal, people aren't running back out the next day and saying, let me get out and put a bet down on a game. They're going, wait, I got to get a job first before I can worry about whether or not I bet on a game. On top of that, I mean, if you look at, just as an example, the casino business, New Jersey reported last week they're losing $540 million a month in revenue. The casino stocks, like I just looked the other day, I was talking to Chad Millman of Action Network, the Wynn stock, MGM, Sands, all of these stocks were down 40 to 60%. And a lot of, if you look at it, first of all, most of those places need crowds to do business. Well, if everybody goes back into society with some trepidation, that means the casino is not full, which means people aren't spending a ton of money. And if those who are willing to go in there don't have jobs to put money down, I think it's going to be a slow build back. Sports betting has been the one category that a lot of TV and radio have really been banking on. It's been seen as the hot category, where the money's going to come, content's going to shift because of it. But I think this just definitely set it back for a while. I don't think this really starts to get back on track the way we were used to, probably till 2021.
He's Jason Barrett, president of Barrett Sports Media. He's a sports radio consultant. You can follow him on Twitter at Sports Radio PD. You sent out a tweet, which the two of us, as local sports radio talk show hosts, really took to heart, in which you said, well, quite frankly, because somebody had asked you, wow, what is sports radio going to do? And you said, well, this is basically going to separate the pretenders from the contenders. You said, now we're going to find out whether or not a show has talent. Can you do a show without the material that you're used to cooking with? What have you seen in the industry? Because right away, Jason, we saw stations in markets as big as San Francisco and Denver pull some of their local shows, and immediately, and we haven't missed a show. And we haven't missed a beat. Now, our content's a little different, but we haven't missed a show. What has happened in the industry?
Well, it depends, obviously. If you go to, for example, where I'm based in New York, I'll use just a local example. A show like Boomer Esiason and Greg Giannotti, they're going to entertain no matter what's happening in sports. They are just built to entertain an audience. they don't rely on last night's result, they're going to be fine. There are plenty of those examples. You mentioned you guys have stayed on and just keep trucking on, and it's probably because you guys aren't building everything you do around what took place last night. I think when situations like this come up, you find out a lot about how comfortable people are putting their lives on the air and getting outside the sports bubble. Because at the end of the day, right now, I'm 46, and I love sports. Radio's been my life for over 2.5 decades. And as much as that occupies my focus, the things that matter right now are my family paying my mortgage, making sure that, my kid can get a graduation day sometime soon, my fiance figuring out when she goes back to work. All those things are way more important than whether or not there was a game on last night or whether or not, the sports radio host has enough content to deal with. I think in these times, look, you're going to talk about some things and they're going to hit. There are going to be some things that miss. I mean, if you go around the country, one of the areas where I just have a hard time right now, I think if you look at some of ESPN's programming, they've been trying to operate as if the sports world is fine. We're going to just keep doing content. And I love when Adam Schefter called out the NFL for continuing with the draft. It's not whether or not they should do a draft. It was the fact that we had a critical point of view on something from ESPN on the NFL draft who are partners with them. But just as an example, guys, go back about a week ago. You remember Rex Ryan calling out Amari Cooper? He called him a turd on Get Up.
Yep.
And if he said that in September, we normally would play that clip and debate it all day, and it would be a fun bit. But he said it last week while all of this other stuff's going on, and I'm just going, does anyone really care about this right now? Like, is this really what's on the mind of a sports fan? Like, yeah, Amari Cooper's overpaid. No, I don't think a lot of people do care about that right now. And so I understand, like, look, if that's your bread and butter and that's how you've built your show, you're going to try to be as normal as you can. The problem with that is when listening patterns and, audience behavior and how they view or listen to content change, you either change with it or otherwise they're going to spend a lot less time with you. And so some of the examples I've seen, I work with a number of stations around the country. I've seen a lot of stations have their ratings go down. Some of that's going to be because someone who's typically in a car in the morning and afternoon now isn't. And when they're in the house, they sit on a couch, they watch TV more. We can talk all day and, issue positive press for smart speaker listening and, streaming, and some of that will help, but it's not going to replace the reality of when you have millions of people driving to and from work and now all of a sudden they're not doing it, you're going to lose something.
On that note, if you're at home on your Comcast, just hit that microphone and say, go to YouTube, Miller and Moulton, and you can watch us on your smart TV. Well, Jason, because that's all hard-hitting, let me get to what I bring to this show, because yesterday, Sean Salisbury, who does mornings in Houston, as you know, has been a good friend of ours on the show, and he, through Twitter, taught me that there is such thing as a frozen Oreo, and it's mind-blowing delicious, which led us to a big-time, serious poll question that we'll leave you with today, Jason.
Yes, Jason.
Oreos, original or double stuff? Your thoughts?
You know what? I'm going to go double stuff.
Yes.
I know it's easy to start and go, well, you start with what brought it to the dance, I guess. But look, I was never a huge Oreo guy in the beginning. Double stuffed is absolutely what made me do a second look. So I'm going to embrace the newness rather than relying on the classic.
Fair enough. I ask you, if you have any for your kids around the house, stick 2 of them in the freezer. As I pointed out in my Twitter video yesterday, bury them under some frozen stuff that no one ever goes to. They'll be there forever. And give yourself 3 hours. You will have a different opinion on the Oreo cookie after you take it out of the freezer.
I appreciate the tip. I'll definitely do that.
Jason, all the best to you, your fiance, your son with graduation. All the best. Stay safe. Hopefully we can do this again.
You got it, guys. Thanks for having me.